What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright, so we are looking at Deuteronomy chapter 11. The past couple of chapters involved Moses kind of recounting the whole debacle at Mount Sinai with making the golden calf idol thing, using that as an example of how the Israelites have been kind of stubborn over the years, and making the point that, God's not blessing them because of their own actions or anything like that. It's just because, God made a promise to, Abraham and other Israelite forefathers, and also kind of, for God's own glory, that, he can choose a somewhat small and insignificant group of people who were slaves in Egypt and, make of them a great nation. But anyway, so since we're not starting off this chapter with a new subsection, let's just take a quick look at, okay, so the previous subsection heading at the end of chapter 10 was a call to love and obedience, especially, obeying God and loving God, and so, again, trailing off of the idea that, God's not blessing them because they're good, but he is choosing to bless them, so really it's all the more reason why, the Israelites should love God and, obey him, because his commands have proven good and true and right, and he's really the only God worth serving and being loyal to and obeying. So anyway, alright, with context out of the way, I think it's about time we get rolling with this. Yeah. So here we go. Deuteronomy chapter 11. This is Moses speaking to start with. Honestly, most of Deuteronomy is Moses speaking. So anyway. You must love the Lord your God and always obey his requirements, decrees, regulations, and commands. Keep in mind that I am not talking now to your children who have never experienced the discipline of the Lord your God or seen his greatness and his strong hand and powerful arm. They didn't see the miraculous signs and wonders he performed in Egypt against Pharaoh and all his land. They didn't see what the Lord did to the armies of Egypt and to their horses and chariots, how he drowned them in the Red Sea as they were chasing you. He destroyed them, and they have not recovered to this very day. I'm a little curious how they would know that. Because, they've been in the wilderness all this time. I guess, it's possible they could have encountered some other groups of people who would have said something about that, but I don't know. It's also a safe assumption, though, that, he, meaning Pharaoh, lost that many troops and chariots and whatnot. It's not an easy thing to just recover. Especially when, you also lost a significant amount of your working force. But, yeah, so, yes, it does hold true that the children of these people would not really have known what God did previously, because these people themselves were likely fairly young whenever all these other events happened. I mean, they would have had to at least be, like, under age 20 when, their elders and whatnot would have been too afraid to go into the Promised Land the first time around. All this stuff that God did, delivering them from Egypt and whatnot, like, the children of this generation of Israelites would not have seen any of that. So, while the, command to love and obey God is still true to them as well, or true for them, I should say, the reasoning behind it isn't as obvious to them, because they wouldn't have seen these things happen. Oh yeah, footnote here, it read sea, Hebrew says Sea of Reeds. That's honestly a footnote we've had multiple times before, just different way of referring to the same thing. The original Hebrew more so would have called it the Sea of Reeds, but we know of it as the Red Sea. Anyway, continuing on in verse 5. Your children didn't see how the Lord cared for you in the wilderness until you arrived here. They didn't see what he did to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, a descendant of Reuben, when the earth opened its mouth in the Israelite camp and swallowed them, along with their households and tents, and every living thing that belonged to them. But you have seen the Lord perform all these mighty deeds with your own eyes. So just giving another example to kind of illustrate the point of, yeah, okay, I'm commanding these things to you. Maybe also he's kind of subtly saying, I'm telling you these things so you can tell your children these things. Because you've lived them, you know the reasons. You're going to need to explain this a bit more to your children. But, yeah, it also, we kind of got an example more so of God's judgment here and, his discipline, as opposed to the previous example, which was more of like a, hey, he helped us kind of situation. So, then we move on to verse 8. Therefore, be careful to obey every command I am giving you today, so you may have strength to go in and take over the land you are about to enter. If you obey, you will enjoy a long life in the land the Lord swore to give to your ancestors and to you, their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. For the land you are about to enter and take over is not like the land of Egypt from which you came, where you planted your seed and made irrigation ditches with your foot as in a vegetable garden. Rather, the land you will soon take over is a land of hills and valleys, with plenty of rain, a land that the Lord your God cares for. He watches over it through each season of the year. I wonder if, I guess that sort of feeds into the, the fact that it is like the promised land, like, again, it being the land that was promised to Abraham and his descendants. Maybe that's supposed to sort of be the tie-in to why God would specifically, like, take extra care of this land specifically. Because otherwise it's just like, it's a random piece of land. Why would God pay any extra attention to it? Because it's the land he promised Abraham. Like, it doesn't really... That's really the only way it makes any kind of sense there. But to these people, that should have meant, all the more reason to know that it was, a good and plentiful land. They wouldn't have to, make irrigation ditches or anything like that. Like, the land would already be just good and fine to, grow their crops. without having to do extra work for it. I mean, yeah, they'd still have to do the basic, planting and harvesting and whatnot, but none of the extra, like, yeah, we gotta redirect the water over here kind of stuff. We'll move on to verse 13. If you carefully obey the commands I am giving you today, and if you love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and soul, then he will send the rains in their proper seasons, the early and late rains, so you can bring in your harvests of grain, new wine, and olive oil. He will give you lush pasture land for your livestock, and you yourselves will have all you want to eat. But be careful. Don't let your heart be deceived so that you turn away from the Lord and serve and worship other gods. If you do, the Lord's anger will burn against you. He will shut up the sky and hold back the rain, and the ground will fail to produce its harvests. Then you will quickly die in that good land the Lord is giving you. So, again, it's like Moses starts off with the good stuff. It's like, all right, here's how it'll go if you obey God, follow his commands and all that. And then, of course, he gives the flip side of like, okay, but if you don't follow God and his commands, then yeah, don't expect it to still be all sunshine and rainbows, possibly quite literally. But anyway, as I was reading this section about, the early and late rains, like why it would mention that specifically, I guess the most logical thing that I could come up with is like, well, because there's some plants that get harvested more in like springtime and others that get harvested kind of later in the year, more like, autumn season. So early rains probably being more toward the spring end, late rains probably being more autumn end. Moving on to verse 18 then, I guess. So commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these words of mine. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Teach them to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are on the road, when you are going to bed and when you are getting up. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, so that as long as the sky remains above the earth, you and your children may flourish in the land the Lord swore to give to your ancestors. Okay, so yeah, a lot of this does sound familiar, if not from earlier in Deuteronomy, then from, prior books of the Bible, like the whole, writing, having this stuff on your forehead or like on your hands or like literally on your person. Basically having it anywhere that would be helpful and or necessary to get frequent reminders of these things. Like, yes, that's been said before, but as was commented earlier, it's because repetition was kind of the main way of reinforcing all this. Like, they didn't really have books. There was only one copy available of the Ten Commandments. Possibly two if Moses, took his own separate notes. But otherwise, that was it. Like, they didn't have any printing presses or, mass-produced books or anything like that. And even if they did, literacy was not as common back then. So even being able to, read all of these words wasn't necessarily within the capabilities of a good number of the Israelites. So yeah, repetition. And honestly, just the repetition itself is kind of what's being suggested here by Moses. It's like, okay, Repeat it often, like remind yourself over and over and over and over and over again, because that's like the main method you all have of making sure you remember these things. So anyway, then we get to verse 22. Be careful to obey all these commands I am giving you. Show love to the Lord your God by walking in his ways and holding tightly to him. Then the Lord will drive out all the nations ahead of you, though they are much greater and stronger than you, and you will take over their land. Wherever you set foot, that land will be yours. Your frontiers will stretch from the wilderness in the south to Lebanon in the north, and from the Euphrates River in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you, for the Lord your God will cause the people to fear and dread you, as he promised, wherever you go in the whole land. So, another reminder of kind of the boundaries, so to speak. I could try and look it up, but also it's like, just think of basically modern day Israel or something close to that. Plus, I mean, Mediterranean Sea on the west is pretty obvious. Euphrates River, pretty obvious boundary. It's really kind of the north and south that are less obvious based on these descriptions, because we're not really as familiar with, the Lebanon or the southern wilderness and where exactly that really started, so to speak, geographically. But anyway, and again, reminder from Moses that God's, basically giving them victory over people that are greater and stronger than them. So it's not like any of their strength or ability is the reason he's choosing them or giving them this land. Footnote there, Hebrews says to the western sea, assumed in reference to the Mediterranean Sea, probably because it wasn't known as the Mediterranean Sea back in that day, but we noted it as the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, moving on to verse 26, I'll probably read through to the end of the chapter. Look, today I am giving you the choice between a blessing and a curse. You will be blessed if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today. But you will be cursed if you reject the commands of the Lord your God and turn away from him and worship gods you have not known before. When the Lord your God brings you into the land and helps you take possession of it, you must pronounce the blessing at Mount Gerizim and the curse at Mount Ebal. These two mountains are west of the Jordan River, in the land of the Canaanites who live in the Jordan Valley, near the town of Gilgal, not far from the lands of Moreh. For you are about to cross the Jordan River to take over the land the Lord your God is giving you. When you take that land and are living in it, you must be careful to obey all the decrees and regulations I am giving you today. Again, kind of saying, hey, don't stray away from God just because, things go well later on when you're in the promised land. Yes, things will go well for you because it's a good and plentiful land. And if you obey God, it will continue to be that way. But if you don't, as mentioned previously, rain's not going to come when it should. You're not going to, have God's protection and blessing. So, yeah, it won't be so good then. Anyway, footnote there at Jordan Valley, Hebrews says the Arabah, which, if I recall correctly, was a name kind of given to, some of the desert region, maybe. Or maybe I'm not remembering that right. I don't know. But, interesting that, he specifically says that they're to pronounce these blessings and curses on these mountains within the land. I guess, I mean, the point of declaring something from the mountain was to help, like, kind of spread the news far and wide a bit easier than, like, trying to just physically go everywhere and tell the people that way. So I think the main point would have been to basically spread the word about God's blessings and his curses, to those who are or are not loyal, respectively. So anyway, TLDR, follow God good, disobey God bad. Anyway, I guess that's going to do it for this chapter. Okay, so not really too much to add there. A lot of what was said in this chapter has kind of been said before. Feel free to go back to those previous videos, for other chapters in Deuteronomy, or even, like, stuff prior to that in the whole Bible study playlist, which, by the way, will be on the screen at the end, if you're on YouTube at least. Sorry, Rumble, there's no end screen feature like that. But anyway, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. Feel free to follow me on Rumble if you, find this on there as well. Look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and all that good stuff. And leave comments below that with any thoughts you have. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. I will say that it actually gets into some new insights from Moses. Woohoo, finally. Anyway, till next time, stay cool, everybody.